Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a part of history that feels so bizarre, so upside down, so absolutely holiday office party level chaotic that even your weirdest uncle couldn't compete. We're talking about the time Christmas, yes, Christmas, got banned for being too wild. Not by the Grinch, not by HOA regulations, but by actual governments who took one look at medieval and early modern holiday behavior and said, "Nope, shut it down. Pack up the wassail, you animals." And before we get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of historical nonsense that helps you fall asleep while questioning humanity's choices. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. It is scientifically proven that someone, somewhere, is listening to this at 2:14 a.m. while wearing mismatched socks and contemplating their life decisions. All right. Lights dimmed, fan on, blanket adjusted, pets bribed, stop stepping on your spleen. Let's settle in. Because you might be wondering, what exactly were people doing that made Christmas legal? How does a holiday go from peace on earth to please stop lighting your neighbor's haystacks on fire? Were people really getting drunk at 9 a.m., singing at strangers, and storming through the streets demanding free food like some kind of medieval DoorDash riot? What did Christmas smell like when hygiene was optional? How did you decorate a home with no electricity, no tinsel, and a roof that leaks more than your uncle after 2 glasses of sherry? And what happens, honestly, truly, when a holiday gets cancelled in a world where entertainment consists of staring at a wall and hoping it doesn't collapse? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the 1640s. The era when Christmas gets outlawed. The Puritans have opinions. And you, yes, you, are about to experience exactly why. Good luck. You wake up expecting jingling bells, good cheer, and maybe a fogey pudding that tastes like despair. But instead you find a town crier yelling that Christmas has been banned. Outright banned. Like it's a controlled substance. Your brain does the 17th century equivalent of a 404 error as you try to understand why carols are now contraband. At first, you assume you're still half asleep. Maybe you misheard him. Maybe he said the goose has been branded, or the miller's wagon is sanded, or some other standard village nonsense. But no, he is very clearly shouting the words Christmas and illegal in the same sentence, which immediately triggers your fight or flight reflex. Mostly flight, because you have no upper body strength and one working shoe. You step outside into the icy morning air, blinking at a world that feels suddenly unfamiliar. Snow crunches under your feet with a sound that normally screams holiday spirit. But today, it just sounds like crime. The houses around you are undecorated, bleak, and aggressively beige, as if someone drained all the color out of December. The villagers gather in terrified clusters, whispering with the urgency of people trying not to look festive. Even the chickens seem unusually somber, which is unsettling because chickens usually look like they're on the verge of spontaneous chaos. Let's talk about the town crier for a moment. Normally, he announces things like market days or missing goats. Today, however, he is reading from a scroll that looks far too official for its own good. He clears his throat with the enthusiasm of someone who has waited his whole life to ruin everyone else's fun. Henceforth, he declares, the celebration of Christmas shall be prohibited, as it is associated with lewdness, disorder, and unholy revelry. You look around, waiting for someone to laugh. But the Puritans are already nodding like bobbleheads at a judgmental car dealership. Their hats are wider than ever, which seems intentional, like aerodynamic design for moral superiority. As the announcement continues, you begin to piece together the logic behind the ban. Last year's Christmas apparently got a little out of hand. Someone tried to roast a pig indoors. Someone else tried to roast themselves indoors. accidentally. A group of inebriated villagers reenacted the nativity using the blacksmith's goat, who did not consent to the role. Choirs sang until dawn. Barrels of ale mysteriously emptied themselves. Someone decorated the magistrate's house with pine branches and a rude poem. It was chaos. The officials, lacking modern coping mechanisms like noise-cancelling headphones, scented candles, or simply ignoring the townspeople, decided the holiday itself was the problem. So instead of addressing the behavior, they banned the entire season. Classic government logic. You watch your neighbor drop a loaf of bread in shock. Another neighbor clutches his coat dramatically, whispering, But what about the pudding? A child bursts into tears because she was promised a toy horse. And now all toys are suspiciously joyful and therefore immoral. And then comes the worst part. You realize you are holding a sprig of holly in your left hand, just casually holding evidence. You drop it faster than if it were a hot potato straight from the devil's oven. Inside your house, things don't get much better. Your fireplace looks naked without greenery. Your cupboards are suddenly full of contraband spices you didn't know were contraband until 5 minutes ago. The whole place feels like a crime scene waiting to happen. And you have the unsettling urge to hide your goose as if it's a fugitive. Neighbors begin visiting one another. Not for carols, but for emergency meetings on how to not look festive. Plans are made. Strategies are formed. Someone suggests wearing only dull colors. Another suggests no one smile until January. Someone else proposes replacing Christmas dinner with a tasteful bowl of grey porridge. The whole village goes into anti-Christmas mode. But here's the part no one wants to admit. The more something is banned, the more people want it. You see it in their eyes. Tiny sparks of rebellion behind all the fear and wool. People are suddenly walking like they're hiding secrets. Children giggle too loudly. The local brewer smiles to himself in a way that suggests illicit ale production is already underway. By midday, the ban feels less like a law and more like a challenge. And as you stand there, snow falling silently around you, you can't help but think, if Christmas was wild enough to get outlawed, maybe you've missed out on something spectacular. Because today you've learned a valuable truth about this era. When the government bans joy, everyone immediately becomes expert in joyful crime. Before Christmas became twinkly lights and passive-aggressive fruitcakes, it was basically a month-long medieval frat party. You learn quickly that authorities weren't banning Christmas because they hated joy. They were banning it because people celebrated like unsupervised toddlers with access to alcohol and livestock. The first thing you notice is that medieval Christmas didn't have an off switch. It wasn't a single day. It wasn't even 12 days. It was an entire season of escalating festive nonsense that started somewhere around December 6th and trailed off sometime in January, when everyone collectively ran out of energy and pickled fish. For weeks, people drank, sang, danced, and occasionally set things on fire purely because the darkness of winter gave them interesting ideas. Let's talk about the drinking. You've seen people overdo it at modern Christmas parties. Your colleague who tries to dance while still holding a folding chair. Your aunt who insists she can absolutely drive, or that one guy who won't stop talking about cryptocurrency. But medieval drinkers made all of them look like amateurs. Ale flowed like water, wine flowed like regret. Someone inevitably invented a new drink that combined both, added heated spices, and served it in containers that smelled like wet sheep. And people drank at all hours. Morning ale, noon ale, night ale. I saw a goose and it inspired me ale. The government didn't care if people had fun. They just cared that no one was sober enough to operate important things like mills, wagons, or doors. Then there were the feasts. Medieval Christmas feasts weren't polite meals with carefully portioned slices of ham. They were sensory overload. Imagine roasted boars' heads with apples shoved in their mouths, whole geese, entire sides of beef, and enough pies to build structural support. The smells alone could cause a religious experience. But the problem wasn't just the eating, it was the aftermath. People rolled into the street like overstuffed dumplings, belching, singing, and declaring themselves kings of the neighborhood. It was joyful, yes. It was also deeply chaotic. Now, let's address the livestock situation. For reasons that remain questionable at best, animals were frequently included in the festivities. Someone might bring a goat inside to join the party. Someone else might put a hat on a pig. Cows wandered through taverns. Chickens were thrown in the air for symbolic reasons. No one remembered. You once witness a man try to convince a sheep to dance with him, which ends exactly how you would expect. The sheep wins. The crowning jewel of chaos, however, was the tradition of mumming. People put on masks, terrifying masks, made of fur, feathers, or whatever they could glue to their faces. Then they'd go door to door acting out plays, reciting poems, or demanding food. A masked group banging on your door at midnight wasn't a crime. It was, technically, holiday cheer. Add to this the tradition of wassailing, where villagers stormed orchards in the middle of the night, chanting and drinking to bless the trees. If you saw this today, you'd assume a cult had moved next door. Medieval people just shrugged and said, "It's for the apples." Authorities looked at all this. The drunk caroling, the masked mobs, the tree ceremonies, the livestock indoors, the spontaneous bonfires, and concluded that maybe, just maybe, things were getting out of hand. So when Christmas reached its absolute peak of chaos, with so many parties happening simultaneously that you could hear wassail songs layered like off-key surround sound, the government snapped. They didn't outlaw joy. They didn't outlaw celebration. They outlawed this swirling tornado of noise, alcohol, animals, costumes, pranks, chanting, feasting, and the general vibe of a village possessed by holiday mania. And honestly, as you watch a drunk man juggle turnips while a masked woman sings at a goat, you start to see the government's point, because medieval Christmas wasn't too merry. It was unmanageable. You roll out of your straw mattress expecting festive warmth, but the house feels like a meat freezer designed by someone who hates meat. There's no tree, no holly, and absolutely no singing unless you want a fine. Even the fireplace crackles judgmentally. Your first conscious thought of the morning is, "Why is my breath visible?" Your second is, "Did someone steal the warmth out of my bones while I slept?" Your third is just a long internal scream, which at least doesn't break any laws. As you stand, your feet hit the icy floor, a sensation similar to stepping directly onto disappointment. You shuffle toward the hearth, hoping for comfort. But the fire gives you the same look a cat gives when you try to pick it up. Disdainful, resigned, slightly offended. Let's talk about the house itself. A medieval December home is not built for comfort. It's built for surviving. Technically, the walls are drafty. Windows have all the insulation of wet paper, and the roof has a charming habit of leaking icy droplets directly onto your scalp. Normally, people would combat this misery by decorating their homes for the season, greenery, candles, songs, anything to distract them from the fact that the indoors and outdoors are roughly the same temperature. But this year, decorations are banned, joy is banned. Crackling fires are discouraged unless your expression is sufficiently somber. Even smiling at the flames counts as suspiciously festive behavior. You wrap yourself in the scratchiest wool blanket humanity has ever produced. It feels like being hugged by a very affectionate cactus. You pull it tighter anyway. The cold is everywhere. On your nose, on your toes, inside your soul. Your house smells faintly of frost, smoke, and the kind of sadness that comes from being told your holiday traditions are now a public threat. Let's talk about breakfast. Usually, the season would call for something warm and spiced. Maybe a sweetbread or a roasted apple if you were lucky. But spices are associated with celebration, and celebration is associated with sin. So, breakfast is now a bowl of grey mush that tastes like unresolved emotional issues. You swallow it anyway, because the alternative is starving or accidentally committing Christmas. As you eat, you look around your barren home. No gifts, no candles arranged with intention, no greenery tucked above the windows to bring in luck. Just the blank beige of anti-cheer minimalism. It feels like living inside a tax form. You decide to warm up by doing chores, which in this era means carrying water from outside, while hypothermia taps you on the shoulder like, "Hey, just checking in." The wind hits your face and immediately steals 30% of your will to live. You watch your breath swirl through the air like it's trying to escape this timeline entirely. While dumping water into a basin, you hear your neighbor accidentally hum 3 notes of a carol before clapping a hand over her mouth like she's committed a felony. Which, technically, she has. You give her a sympathetic nod, the medieval version of "I won't snitch." Back inside, the fire pops again, sounding exactly like it's judging your life choices. You crouch next to it, trying to siphon warmth, but it radiates the bare minimum, like a boss who approves your time off but makes sure you feel bad about it. As the morning drags on, the cold becomes a personality trait. You start thinking nostalgic thoughts about last year, when the same freezing house at least had the dignity of smelling like cinnamon, roasted goose, and collective holiday delusion. Now it smells like damp wood and repression. And yet, something stirs inside you. A tiny ember of rebellion. Maybe, just maybe, the cold wouldn't feel so brutal if you could sneak even one festive thing into the house. A sprig of holly, a crumb of sweetbread, a candle arranged in a way that suggests joy but denies everything if questioned. But for now, you pull your cactus blanket tighter, sit by your suspicious fire, and breathe in the chilly air of a December morning where cheer is a punishable offense. A house that was cold before is now cold on purpose. And that might be the bleakest holiday upgrade in history. As you wander into the village, you spot the Puritans, tall hats, stern expressions, and the overall vibe of people who would unplug your holiday lights just to teach you restraint. They're holding a sermon about sinful merriment, and you can feel your inner holiday spirit shrivel. You've never seen a group of people so committed to looking disappointed. Every Puritan resembles someone who has been personally wronged by a festive cookie. Their eyebrows hover in a state of permanent disapproval, like they're trying to win a competition for most concerned about nothing in particular. The hats don't help, giant, dark, and somehow more severe than the faces beneath them. They look less like fashion and more like emotional helmets. The air around them feels colder, too. It's not the weather, it's the vibe. You get a chill that has nothing to do with winter and everything to do with the fact that these are people who consider laughter a gateway drug. Let's talk about the sermon. The Puritan minister stands on his wooden podium, clearing his throat with the intensity of someone about to deliver a PowerPoint presentation on the dangers of smiling. Except there is no PowerPoint. There is just a booming voice and a lot of dramatic hand gestures. He preaches against excessive joy, ungodly noise, and celebrations of the flesh, which is Puritan code for people having even a vaguely pleasant time. You stand among the villagers, doing your best to look serious. Your face contorts into a stern expression you hope reads as deeply pious, but probably just looks like you're trying not to sneeze. Any hint of amusement could get you side-eyed so hard you dissolve on the spot. The minister continues, railing against the chaos of past Christmases. He mentions dancing, scandalous. He mentions music, corrupting. He mentions eating too much pudding, morally slippery. You nod along, though internally you're imagining what these people would think of modern holiday office parties. The Secret Santa exchange alone would send them into an existential crisis. As the sermon drones on, a wind cuts through the square, whipping at cloaks and chilling your bones. Even the breeze feels like it's obeying Puritan rules, avoiding anything that could be interpreted as playful. The whole village is standing stiffly, as if afraid to move too quickly and accidentally generate cheer. Let's talk about Puritan fashion for a moment. The clothes are functional, wool, dark, scratchy, and about as comforting as being hugged by a disapproving relative. No bright colors, no patterns, no embroidery. Just layers of muted fabric that whisper, "I'm chilly and emotionally repressed." The hats, wide-brimmed and black, cast shadows over their faces, giving them the appearance of people who are preparing to interview you for a job you definitely won't get. Every Puritan carries a Bible or a stern pamphlet with titles like The Dangers of Dancing or a treatise against joviality. You wonder if they have a pamphlet about banning pamphlets. It seems on brand. At some point, the minister dramatically recounts stories of previous year's unholy revels. The crowd murmurs disapprovingly, though you can tell some people are secretly reminiscing. One old man wipes a tear from his eye, not of sadness, but nostalgia. You can practically hear his inner thoughts. Those were the good old days. We got drunk, fell in the snow, and sang the wrong lyrics at the wrong door. Beautiful times. The sermon finally ends with a booming declaration. Joy leads to sin leads to chaos, and chaos leads to the downfall of civilization, apparently. It's a dramatic escalation, but the Puritans love a slippery slope. When the crowd disperses, a few Puritans remain behind, patrolling the village with the energy of mall cops in matching hats. They glare at windows, they glare at firewood, they glare at a loaf of bread that looks suspiciously warm. You try not to draw attention to yourself, but every step feels like you're walking through a judgment obstacle course. Everyone is afraid to smile too broadly, speak too lightly, or cough in a festive rhythm. The whole village has entered what can only be described as seasonal emotional lockdown. As you head home, you can't help reflecting on the Puritans' mission. They aren't waging war on Christmas itself. They're waging war on anything remotely fun. Cheer, spices, lightheartedness, probably puppies. Anything that sparks joy is immediately placed on the suspect list. And as you close your door behind you, you realize something important. You've just witnessed the medieval version of a holiday being cancelled by people who would absolutely shut down a karaoke night for being too provocative. In the Puritans' eyes, fun is the enemy, which, unfortunately, makes you a potential suspect. You think about decorating anyway. Maybe a little holly, nothing fancy, but apparently greenery on your door is now the 17th century equivalent of leaving evidence at the scene of a crime. Even owning mistletoe feels like smuggling contraband. You stand in your doorway, staring at the bare wood like it's personally offended you. It looks wrong, empty, undressed. A door with no decoration in December is like a living room with no couch, or a cat with no sense of superiority. It feels unnatural. The absence of cheer hangs in the air like a draft. A cold, moralistic breeze brought to you by people who think joy is a slippery slope to eternal damnation. You hold a tiny sprig of holly in your hand, barely bigger than your thumb, and you feel like you're gripping the 17th century equivalent of illegal fireworks. You imagine a Puritan magistrate popping out from behind a barrel, shouting, "Aha! A leaf of sin," before hauling you away. You quickly shove the holly inside your coat, where it pokes you in the ribs as if scolding you for being spineless. Let's talk about decorations in this era. Normally, Christmas would transform your gloomy winter home into something almost pleasant. Branches of holly, ivy draped along the beams, a bit of greenery stuck near the hearth to remind everyone that life still existed outside the cold, frozen mud. Even poorer families scraped together whatever they could to make their homes feel a little less depressing. Mostly plants, occasionally colorful cloth, sometimes even dried apples if mice hadn't eaten them. This year, however, decorating your home is essentially confessing to a crime. Greenery has become suspicious. Anything bright or festive is considered evidence of spiritual misconduct. Even candles arranged in a cozy configuration can be interpreted as rebellious optimism. You stand in your dim kitchen staring at the single candle on your table. It flickers. You flicker. Together, both of you look guilty. You try to imagine what the Puritans think when they see a decorated home. Wickedness, probably. Revelry, maybe. Uncontrolled emotional expression, definitely. It's hard to say. They have the kind of worldview where a pine branch could lead to eternal ruin. The villagers know better than to risk it. As you walk through town, you spot houses that look like they're actively trying to camouflage themselves into the greyness. Someone even scraped frost off their window because it looked too sparkly. Another neighbor trims back ivy with the focus and fear normally reserved for bomb disposal. Even the cats look tense, as if they, too, might be accused of seasonal enthusiasm. Let's talk about the psychological toll of a decoration ban. Without greenery, your home feels colder. The walls feel closer. The winter darkness seems sharper, heavier. You miss the bright spots of color, the smell of pine, the small rituals that make December feel like something other than an extended survival challenge. So you begin experimenting. First, you place the holly on your table. It looks festive, too festive. You yank it away like it's hot. Then you hide it in a bowl. Still too risky. Then you tuck it under your mattress. That feels deranged. Eventually you settle for placing a single leaf behind a wooden beam, angled so only you can see it if you squint. It's not much. It's barely decoration. It might not even count as a plant anymore, but it's something. A microscopic rebellion. The problem is, once you taste forbidden decor, your brain immediately escalates. What about a string of dried berries? What about a little ivy in the corner? What about a candle that, heaven forbid, smells nice? But the streets are being patrolled, and you've already seen one man get fined for leaving a bit of holly on his doorstep, which he swears fell from a bush on its own. The magistrate didn't buy his story, probably because the bush in question is 40 feet away. As night falls, you catch yourself staring longingly at the blank space above your hearth. You imagine the greenery that should hang there, lush, cheerful, defiant. But imagination is the only safe decoration you have left. Because this year, Christmas decor isn't just frowned upon. It's dangerous, suspicious, and heartbreakingly pathetic when you try to do it anyway. And you never thought a leaf could feel so contraband. You think about decorating anyway, maybe a little holly, nothing fancy. But apparently greenery on your door is now the 17th century equivalent of leaving evidence at the scene of a crime. Even owning mistletoe feels like smuggling contraband. You stand in your doorway, staring at the bare wood like it's personally offended you. It looks wrong, empty. Undressed. A door with no decoration in December is like a living room with no couch, or a cat with no sense of superiority. It feels unnatural. The absence of cheer hangs in the air like a draft, a cold, moralistic breeze brought to you by people who think joy is a slippery slope to eternal damnation. You hold a tiny sprig of holly in your hand, barely bigger than your thumb, and you feel like you're gripping the 17th century equivalent of illegal fireworks. You imagine a Puritan magistrate popping out from behind a barrel shouting, "Aha! A leaf of sin!" before hauling you away. You quickly shove the holly inside your coat, where it pokes you in the ribs as if scolding you for being spineless. Let's talk about decorations in this era. Normally, Christmas would transform your gloomy winter home into something almost pleasant. Branches of holly, ivy draped along the beams, a bit of greenery stuck near the hearth to remind everyone that life still existed outside the cold, frozen mud. Even poorer families scraped together whatever they could to make their homes feel a little less depressing. Mostly plants, occasionally colorful cloth, sometimes even dried apples if mice hadn't eaten them. This year, however, decorating your home is essentially confessing to a crime. Greenery has become suspicious. Anything bright or festive is considered evidence of spiritual misconduct. Even candles arranged in a cozy configuration can be interpreted as rebellious optimism. You stand in your dim kitchen staring at the single candle on your table. It flickers, you flicker. Together, both of you look guilty. You try to imagine what the Puritans think when they see a decorated home. Wickedness, probably. Revelry, maybe. Uncontrolled emotional expression, definitely. It's hard to say. They have the kind of worldview where a pine branch could lead to eternal ruin. The villagers know better than to risk it. As you walk through town, you spot houses that look like they're actively trying to camouflage themselves into the grayness. Someone even scraped frost off their window because it looked too sparkly. Another neighbor trims back ivy with the focus and fear normally reserved for bomb disposal. Even the cats look tense, as if they too might be accused of seasonal enthusiasm. Let's talk about the psychological toll of a decoration ban. Without greenery, your home feels colder. The walls feel closer. The winter darkness seems sharper, heavier. You miss the bright spots of color, the smell of pine, the small rituals that make December feel like something other than an extended survival challenge. So you begin experimenting. First, you place the holly on your table. It looks festive. Too festive. You yank it away like it's hot. Then you hide it in a bowl. Still too risky. Then you tuck it under your mattress. That feels deranged. Eventually, you settle for placing a single leaf behind a wooden beam, angled so only you can see it if you squint. It's not much. It's barely decoration. It might not even count as a plant anymore. But it's something, a microscopic rebellion. The problem is, once you taste forbidden decor, your brain immediately escalates. What about a string of dried berries? What about a little ivy in the corner? What about a candle that, heaven forbid, smells nice? But the streets are being patrolled, and you've already seen one man get fined for leaving a bit of holly on his doorstep, which he swears fell from a bush on its own. The magistrate didn't buy his story, probably because the bush in question is 40 feet away. As night falls, you catch yourself staring longingly at the blank space above your hearth. You imagine the greenery that should hang there, lush, cheerful, defiant. But imagination is the only safe decoration you have left. Because this year, Christmas decor isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous, suspicious, and heartbreakingly pathetic when you try to do it anyway. And you never thought a leaf could feel so contraband. Caroling isn't just frowned upon, it's illegal. Yet here you are, hiding behind a barn, humming a hymn at a volume so quiet it could be mistaken for asthma. One wrong note, and the local constable will appear like a holiday jump scare. You press your back against the rough wooden boards of the barn, trying not to breathe too loudly. The cold night air stings your lungs, and each exhale looks suspiciously like it might form the opening mist of a festive music video. You cover your mouth just in case. Nothing can look seasonal right now. Not even your breath. Your humming becomes softer, more tentative. You sound less like a person singing and more like a malfunctioning teapot. But you keep going because something inside you, maybe your soul, maybe boredom, refuses to give up the simple joy of a melody. Let's talk about caroling before the ban. It wasn't polite, rehearsed, or particularly melodic. Caroling back then meant bands of half-sober villagers roaming the streets singing loudly enough to wake ancestors. Harmonies were rare. Rhythm was optional. Lyrics changed depending on who forgot what. But it was joyful, chaotic, and one of the few ways people survived the dark winter months without screaming. Now, caroling is considered a moral offense. Authorities argue that music leads to dancing, dancing leads to merriment, merriment leads to sinful thoughts, and sinful thoughts lead to, well, no one actually specifies what comes next, but they look very worried about it. You peek around the barn corner. The square is quiet, lit only by a few lanterns that sway in the wind like they're nodding along to forbidden tunes. Across the way you spot the constable, a man who walks as if joy personally insulted him. His hat brim covers half his face, giving him the silhouette of someone who would absolutely arrest a goose for honking too festively. You shrink back behind the barn. That's when you hear it. A faint sound in the distance. Soft, breathy, almost timid. You tilt your head, listening. It's not the wind. It's not a stray animal. It's humming. Another outlaw. You move toward the sound, stepping lightly over the cold mud until you find them. 4 villagers huddled in a circle, all leaning in as if sharing state secrets. They look up when they see you, startled, then relax when you lift your hands in the universal gesture of, I, too, am here for the illegal music. One of them, a woman with frost in her hair and defiance in her eyes, whispers, We're doing the first verse of God, rest ye merry gentlemen. But very, very gently. You nod, of course. They make room for you. And you join the circle. The 5 of you look like conspirators plotting a revolution, when really you're planning vocal warm-ups. Someone gives the world's tiniest count-in, 1, 2, shh, shh, and the hymn begins. It is the quietest carol ever sung in the history of humanity. It's less song and more collective exhale, but somehow, in the cold night, the barely audible notes feel magical. You can smell wood smoke. You can hear the crunch of snow under an occasional footstep. You feel your heartbeat slowing, syncing with the soft pulse of the melody. Then, disaster. One man accidentally sings a note slightly too loud. Not loud, just audible. The entire group freezes instantly. Your head swiveled toward the road. You hold your breath so sharply your chest creaks like old floorboards. The constable pauses. He sniffs the air, like a bloodhound trained specifically to detect cheer. You all flatten yourselves against the barn wall. No one moves. No one breathes. You silently curse the man with the overconfident lungs. The constable squints suspiciously at the darkness, then mutters something about the cold and shuffles away, clearly uninterested in fighting crime when his toes are numb. Collectively, your group exhales. The man who sang 2 loud mouths a very sincere apology. And then, because humans are stubborn creatures incapable of learning lessons the first time, someone whispers, "Second verse?" You all nod. Because tonight, in a world determined to stamp out joy, you've discovered something beautiful. Whisper, caroling tastes twice as sweet and absolutely 10 times as stupid, which is why it's perfect. In a time before Netflix, Christmas entertainment was mostly get drunk and wander around demanding gifts, which somehow passed as a tradition. You begin to understand why local officials were sweating through their linen shirts. You've heard whispers of the old pre-ban Christmases, but nothing quite prepares you for the mental image of entire villages stumbling around like you dropped them into a medieval version of a holiday office party. Except no one had an office, and no one had HR. And everyone felt it was perfectly reasonable to show up to a neighbor's door in a state of cheerful drunkenness, shout a rhyme, and expect baked goods in return. Let's talk about the wassailers. These were people who took caroling and dialed it up to 11. They'd brew potent bowls of spiced ale, so potent they could probably remove varnish, and then set out on a roving tour of the village. Their mission? Spread cheer, spread warmth, spread absolutely zero awareness of personal boundaries. You imagine these groups stumbling from cottage to cottage, singing loudly and off-key, banging on doors like festive debt collectors. And the rule, unspoken but firmly enforced, was that homeowners had to give them something. Food, drink, coins, anything to make them go away. It was the medieval equivalent of having trick-or-treaters, except the trick was adult humans sloshing with booze, and the treat was whatever you could throw at them to make them leave before they broke your fence. You begin to see why authorities panicked. Let's talk about the alcohol. Holiday ale back then wasn't mild. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't something you sipped while contemplating your life choices. It was a drink that made you create bad life choices. 1 cup could warm your entire body. 2 cups could knock you into philosophical territory. 3 cups could make you climb onto a table and announce that you are the Lord of Misrule, even if the town already picked someone else for that job. By cup 4, you were outside trying to pet livestock that didn't want to be pet. Officials watched this unfold year after year. With each passing December, they grew a little more concerned, then a little more horrified, then deeply suspicious that Christmas itself was made of pure chaos. Let's talk about the behavior. People didn't just drink and sing. Oh no, that would have been manageable. They drank and sang and danced and flirted and swapped roles with each other. Servants dressed like nobles. Nobles acted like servants. Bakers pretended to be bishops. Shepherds declared themselves kings. And some drunk villager inevitably tried to climb the church roof every year because he swore the stars looked closer from up there. Imagine that happening on your quiet street today. You'd call someone. Anyone. The Puritans looked at this swirling snow globe of disorder and said, absolutely not. They saw Christmas as a threat to public order, a gateway to lawlessness, a seasonal anarchy that led to broken windows, empty barrels, damaged reputations, and very confused livestock. You can almost picture the town meeting. Stern officials sweating profusely while someone in the back hiccups the words fa la la. The constables scribbling reports that read things like, subject became convinced he could talk to geese, and entire group attempted to take over the baker's shop while singing aggressively about pudding. Let's talk about how you fit into all this. As you stand in the cold today, watching your miserable, celebration-free village, it's almost impossible to imagine these streets overflowing with disorderly cheer, but the faint traces linger. A wink here, a whisper there. Drunken ghosts of holidays past. You realize the authorities weren't battling Christmas, they were battling human nature, battling boredom, battling the irresistible urge to have fun when everything is bleak and frozen. Fun, as it turns out, is stubborn. And maybe that's why Christmas survived. Because even in the face of bans and fines and humorless officials, humans cannot resist the seasonal temptation to overeat, oversing, and overdrink. It's baked into the winter air like frost. You pull your cloak tighter around you as the wind blows, imagining the rowdy, joyful chaos that once danced down this street. And for a moment, you understand both sides. The Puritans fearing the annual drunken apocalypse, and the villagers needing just one night where they could forget how hard life was. A threat? Maybe. A tradition? Absolutely. And if you listen closely, you swear you can hear the faint echo of laughter carried on the winter wind. Before Christmas was wholesome, villagers used to pick a random troublemaker to be the Lord of Misrule, whose job was to orchestrate chaos. You can't think of a single modern equivalent except maybe your friend Greg, after 3 eggnogs. The first thing you learn is that this role wasn't symbolic. It wasn't honorary. It wasn't a title given out at the end of a feast to someone with a slightly upbeat personality. No. The Lord of Misrule was a full-time chaos coordinator, whose job description was essentially make everyone behave badly, loudly, and preferably with livestock. The selection process was simple. Pick the rowdiest person, the funniest person, or the person least qualified to be in charge of anything important. Sometimes this was a village prankster. Sometimes it was the local blacksmith. Sometimes it was a teenager, which historians agree was a questionable decision. The point wasn't competence. It was enthusiasm. You watch the villagers gather in the town square to select this year's lord. The wind howls. Snowflakes swirl like confetti. Someone forgot to stop throwing. Everyone stands around muttering names with the seriousness of a jury deciding a verdict. Eventually, someone shouts, "Thomas!" and everyone cheers, or groans, or both. Thomas, a man who looks permanently 1 ale away from questionable decisions, is dragged to the center. A makeshift crown is placed crookedly on his head. It's not a fancy crown. It's not even symmetrical. It looks like someone stepped on it. But it carries power, the kind of power that comes with no supervision. And just like that, Thomas becomes the temporary monarch of mayhem. Let's talk about his duties. The Lord of Misrule's main job was to ensure the celebrations descended into maximum absurdity. He planned feasts, games, and pranks. He encouraged singing, drinking, and mock ceremonies. He appointed officers from the village, people who normally had no authority, but now wielded it with the confidence of someone who has borrowed power and will absolutely misuse it. Under his rule, peasants could temporarily boss around the wealthy. Servants could order around masters. Everyone swapped roles, responsibilities, and dignity. It was a social upheaval so ridiculous that even the sheep looked confused. Thomas begins by issuing a decree. All must wear something silly on their heads. People comply immediately. Within minutes, the square becomes a parade of nonsense hats, buckets, baskets, dead chickens, someone wearing a loaf of bread like a helmet. You yourself end up with a bundle of straw perched on your hair like a scarecrow, auditioning for a fashion show. Then come the games. Not wholesome games, not safe games, games with rules that don't make sense and probably never did. First is Snapdragon, a game where dried fruit floats in a shallow bowl of flaming brandy, and players compete to snatch raisins from a literal fire. You watch a man lose part of his eyebrow and still declare it immense fun. Modern safety inspectors would cry. Then comes the mock court. Thomas sits on an overturned barrel, pretending to be a king. People bring cases before him. My neighbor stole my goose. My husband snores too loudly. The baker's pies taste like regret. Thomas hands out punishments that are not legally binding and are mostly public embarrassment. Someone is sentenced to wear socks on their hands. Someone else must hop everywhere until sunset. The baker must sing loudly until people forgive him. Later comes the chaotic procession through the streets. Thomas leads the way, blowing a horn that sounds like a wounded cow. Behind him, the entire village follows, singing songs out of tune and beating on pots as if waging war on cookware. Even the animals join the march, half willingly, half because someone forgot to tie them up. At one point, Thomas commands everyone to dance. You join the swirling crowd, moving in what can generously be described as rhythmic confusion. Snow falls, lanterns flicker, a dog howls along to the music, and for a brief moment, the whole village becomes a joyful, ridiculous mess. But here's the twist. Beneath all the absurdity, the Lord of Misrule tradition served a purpose. Winter was dark, cold, and brutal. People needed release, laughter, role reversal, permission to be foolish for a while. It wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was survival through silliness. Which is why, as you watch Thomas fall off his makeshift throne and declare it part of the plan, you realize no modern office party, no neighborhood gathering, not even your friend Greg at New Year's comes close to the sanctioned, structured lunacy of a medieval Christmas ruled by a Lord of Misrule. And honestly, you kind of miss it already. Someone hands you a bowl of suspicious alcohol and insists you shout blessings at trees. Apparently, this helps the harvest. You participate because it feels rude not to, but the trees look unimpressed. The bowl in your hands is warm, too warm, and smells like a mixture of apples, spices, ambition, and poor judgment. You take a hesitant sip. It burns all the way down, leaving a trail of heat that suggests the drink was brewed by someone who believes subtlety is a foreign word. You cough once. The group cheers. This is their idea of encouragement. As you step into the orchard, you realize you weren't mentally prepared for the experience of yelling at trees. They stand there silently, branches bare, coated with frost, looking exactly like the sort of beings that do not appreciate loud guests. Still, the wassailers assure you this is tradition, important tradition, sacred tradition, the kind of tradition that gets you strange looks if you refuse. Let's talk about wassailing. Wassailing is part agricultural ritual, part winter party, and part community therapy session disguised as drunken yelling. The idea, according to the group's elder spokesman, a man whose breath smells like mulled apples and zero restraint, is that shouting good wishes at the trees will wake them up, because apparently trees respond to motivational speeches. You join the group as they gather around the oldest apple tree in the orchard. Everyone raises their bowls. Someone begins shouting a blessing that sounds like it was composed by poets who got into the wassail bowl early. The rest of the group chants along, stomping their feet for emphasis. You stomp too, though mostly because the ground is uneven, and you don't want to fall into a root system. The shouting intensifies. The trees remain unmoved. Let's talk about the experience from the tree's point of view. Imagine being dormant, minding your own business, gathering your strength for spring, and suddenly 40 humans appear, sloshed on spiced ale, screaming encouragement at you like overly enthusiastic gym trainers. You'd probably shut down emotionally too. But the villagers insist this ritual works. It scares away evil spirits, encourages the trees to bear fruit, and brings good fortune. Also, it's a fantastic excuse to drink in the dead of winter. Now you're instructed to knock on the trunks, gently, respectfully, but firmly enough to remind them of their duties. You tap the tree with the flat of your hand. The bark is cold and rough, and gives absolutely no sign it heard you. Someone else taps so aggressively the group hisses at him for being rude to the tree. "It's sensitive," they whisper. You nod solemnly. You had no idea trees had workplace boundaries. Then comes the loudest part of the ritual, the singing. The wassailers burst into a song, a boisterous, slightly off-kilter tune praising apples, orchards, and alcohol in ways that feel oddly spiritual despite the slurred harmonies. You try to join in, but the lyrics sound like a chant invented by drunk druids. You hum instead. No one notices. Everyone is too busy performing. Let's talk about the mummers. They show up midway through the ritual, wearing mismatched costumes that look like someone raided a barn and declared it fashion. They act out little plays, comic skits involving pretend battles, talkative animals, and heroic apple trees. You watch one man dressed as a cow give a motivational speech. Another pretends to be a knight defending the orchard from imaginary threats. This part of the ritual apparently symbolizes the triumph of good over evil, but mostly it symbolizes adults going mildly feral in winter. The wassail bowl is passed around again. You drink again. Everything seems funnier the second time. By now, people are laughing, stomping, shouting, singing, and occasionally slipping on patches of ice, all under the banner of agricultural encouragement. The trees, shockingly, still look like trees. Toward the end of the ritual, someone takes a piece of bread soaked in the wassail and places it carefully in the branches of the oldest tree. This is called a toast, a pun that appears to be older than any of you. The bread sits there awkwardly, slowly freezing. Finally, the leader claps his hands. "That's it," he declares. "The trees will bless us this year." Everyone cheers. You glance at the orchard one last time. Nothing has changed. The trees look exactly as comatose as before. But something else has changed. The people feel lighter, hopeful, warmer on the inside, in both the emotional and alcoholic sense. And you realize the ritual isn't about waking the trees at all. It's about waking the people, giving them something to believe in when winter is long, joy is banned, and life feels duller than a wooden spoon. You trudge back toward the village with the others, head buzzing, cheeks flushed, heart strangely full, trees unimpressed. People rejuvenated, harvest TBD. But for now, this was enough. As you walk through town, you're startled by masked revelers wearing costumes that look like discount Halloween meets livestock auction. You're informed this used to be normal. You nod, because resisting the chaos seems pointless. The first thing you notice is that none of the masks match anything you would consider a coherent theme. One person is wearing a horse skull tied to their head with fraying rope. Another has fashioned a face covering from a sheep's fleece, which makes them resemble an angry cloud. A third wears what you can only assume is an inverted basket with two eye holes carved out, either a costume or a cry for help. And somehow, all of this is completely standard for a pre-ban Christmas. Let's talk about mumming, the tradition responsible for this fever dream parade. Mumming, you quickly learn, was an old, seasonal practice where people dressed in masks, furs, rags, or whatever they could steal from a barn, and then wandered house to house performing chaotic little plays. These weren't rehearsed, they weren't good, and they definitely weren't subtle. It was like a community theatre troupe made up entirely of people who failed auditions on purpose. The shows were a mixture of slapstick, improvised lines, and whatever plot someone vaguely remembered from last year. Themes ranged from death and resurrection to the cow that wouldn't cooperate. Sometimes the performance involved fighting, sometimes dancing, sometimes both at once, in a rhythm that suggested mild panic. You witness one troupe reenacting a story that might technically be the Nativity, but looks more like a livestock custody dispute. The baby is a turnip. Joseph is clearly drunk. Mary is wearing someone's curtain as a veil. And the wise men keep arguing over who forgot the props. What really seals the Halloween resemblance, though, is the behavior. Mummers don't knock politely on doors. They burst in, cheerfully, loudly, in masks that would terrify even the bravest modern trick-or-treater. And instead of simply saying hello, they demand food, drink, or attention. Sometimes all three at once. You can tell this was once considered charming, in the same way a raccoon rummaging through your kitchen might be considered quirky. Standing in the square, you take in the full sensory experience, the squeaking of wooden masks rubbing against damp wool, the thud of boots slipping on frozen mud, the sound of someone trying to sing through a goat-hide face covering, and mostly sounding like a distressed accordion. There is also the smell. Oh, the smell. A mix of unwashed costumes, animal pelts, sweat, ale, and the general scent of December decay. It hits you like a wall, a holiday wall built entirely of questionable decisions. Despite everything, the villagers watch with fond amusement, as though remembering a slightly embarrassing yet beloved family tradition. One elderly woman tells you, "Back then we didn't have much, so we made our own fun." You nod politely, though you suspect fun is doing a heavy amount of historical lifting in this sentence. The more you watch, the more you realize something. This wasn't just a performance, it was social chaos affirmation, a chance for people to forget their hardships and embrace absolute seasonal nonsense. Winter was long, dark, hungry, and miserable. Dressing up like an unhinged woodland creature and invading your neighbors' houses was, apparently, therapeutic. One masked reveler approaches you, a man in a tattered cloak wearing a pig's snout made from leather. He leans in and asks, "Would you like to join the dance?" His voice is muffled. His mask smells like old bacon. You decline. He shrugs and skips away, snorting for dramatic effect. By the time the procession moves on, you feel both relieved and oddly charmed. Yes, it's chaotic. Yes, it's unsettling. Yes, it looks like a medieval haunted house had a baby with a barn. But beneath the masks and theatrical nonsense, there's something beautiful. Community, laughter, shared absurdity, a collective agreement that winter is awful, life is short, and occasionally dressing up like a possessed goat is good for morale. Of course, none of this helps explain to the Puritans why Christmas felt too wild to survive. But as you watch a masked reveler faceplant into a snowdrift and pop up cheering, you think, maybe the Puritans actually had a point. People exchange gifts sometimes, usually items like candles, socks, or a goose leg. Someone pretended wasn't already half-eaten. It's not the thought that counts, it's survival. You never realized how luxurious modern holiday gifts are. Electronics, fuzzy blankets, artisanal chocolates, until you witness a villager proudly handing over a bundle of sticks and receiving a genuine tearful thank you. These are not gifts designed to spark joy. These are gifts designed to help you not die. Let's talk about actual medieval Christmas gift-giving. It didn't happen often, and when it did, it was usually practical, useful, borderline bleak. No one here is giving perfumes or jewelry or handmade sentimental trinkets. Instead, you might receive a pair of wool socks someone knitted aggressively, a small pouch of salt, a chunk of lard in a cloth, a spoon, a nicer spoon, a wooden comb that doubles as a weapon if needed. It's the sort of holiday haul that would make a modern teenager collapse in protest. But now, in the era when Christmas celebrations are banned, even these meager gifts have become risky. The government is very concerned that the act of giving someone an object, especially if done with warmth, could lead to happiness. And if there's anything the authorities despise more than frivolity, It's the faint hint of festive emotion. You watch one man try to hand a candle to his sister, only for both of them to jump guiltily when a constable walks by. They pretend the candle is not a gift, not a symbol, not even an item of human use. They stare at it like it's a strange insect. After the constable leaves, the man whispers, "It's for the darkness," which is probably the least festive gift explanation in the history of the holiday. But you understand the stakes. If you gift something too nice, too warm, too seasonal, you're on a watch list. Let's talk about the weird gifts, because practical presents aren't the place. Whole story. Some villagers give stranger, more interpretive gifts. One woman hands her neighbor a single, enormous turnip, no explanation. Just a huge root vegetable wrapped in a strip of cloth like a sad baby. The neighbor accepts this with solemn gratitude, as if being given the raw ingredients for soup is an emotional milestone. Someone else hands over a lump of beeswax. Beeswax. Not a candle. Just the wax. The receiver clutches it like it's treasure. And honestly, in winter, it sort of is. Then there's the goose leg. The infamous goose leg. It appears at least once in every household, the slightly eaten limb of a bird that's clearly stolen from last year's feast. It's greasy, questionably fresh, and wrapped in paper that looks suspiciously reused. When someone gives it to you, you're supposed to pretend not to notice the bite mark, but the most illegally festive gift of all is the spiced cake. Flour is precious. Spices are suspicious. Sugar is well. Sugar doesn't even exist for most villagers. But some rebels manage to produce tiny cakes, flavored with the faintest hint of something warm and sweet. One bite feels like committing a felony with your tongue. Tonight, as the ban hangs over the village like a fog of disappointment, you witness a secret exchange. An older woman hands a young girl a small, cloth-wrapped object behind a stable. You watch with the intensity of someone who's been starved for narrative drama. The girl unwraps it slowly. Inside is a ribbon. Not a fancy ribbon. Not a colorful ribbon. Just a simple strip of fabric, dyed a muted blue that might once have been brighter before time and washing drained its joy. But the girl gasps, softly, as if she's been handed diamonds. Her eyes light up, the kind of light the Puritans fear. The older woman shushes her, glancing around. "Hide it," she whispers, "and don't let anyone see it, or they'll confiscate it in the name of virtue." The girl nods, tucking the ribbon into her sleeve, like it's contraband gold. And you realize something. Tonight's gifts aren't about extravagance. They aren't about meaning. They aren't even about celebration. They're about resilience. About reminding each other, quietly, rebelliously, that they're still human. In a world where joy is illegal, even a half-eaten goose leg is a love letter. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. A group of grim-looking officials patrols the street, making sure no one is celebrating. They look like the kind of people who would confiscate gingerbread. They probably do. You watch them from your window, barely breathing, the way you'd watch a raccoon in your yard when you're not sure if it's cute or rabid. They march in a tight formation, boots crunching through the frost, cloaks flapping like angry ravens. Their hats are absurdly large, wide brims casting dramatic shadows across their perpetually frowning faces. It's unclear whether the hats serve a practical purpose, or if they simply amplify their aura of seasonal hostility. These are the men responsible for enforcing the Christmas ban, the Puritan Christmas Police. They don't have an official name, but villagers whisper that the officers are chosen specifically for their inability to enjoy anything. Legend says if you smile at one of them, they'll write your name in a ledger and send you home with a stern lecture about the moral decay of merriment. Let's talk about their equipment. Each one carries a long staff, not for protection, but for knocking on doors dramatically. They also carry a copy of moral statutes, scrolls of rules dictating exactly what constitutes unholy festivity. The list is long, very long. It includes such offenses as displaying greenery, singing loudly, singing softly, cooking anything that smells joyful, gatherings of more than 3 people, gatherings of fewer than 3 people. If those people look like they're having fun, they take their job seriously, very seriously. You see them stop an old man whose only crime seems to be walking too briskly, which they deem suspiciously spirited. They question him. He insists he was just cold. They let him go. Barely. You step away from the window and try to look casual. Not happy, not sad, just neutral. A human beige. You sit at your table and pretend to read your own wooden spoon. Because you don't own a book and you need to look occupied. There's a sudden knock at your door. 3 sharp knocks, the kind designed to startle your soul. Your heart launches into your throat like a startled pigeon. You open the door a crack, just enough to peek out. A Christmas policeman is standing there, towering over you, looking like someone who once lost a staring contest with joy and has never recovered. "Good evening," he says, though his tone implies no such thing. "We're conducting routine checks." You nod in a way that you hope communicates. "I am a completely joyless citizen and pose no threat to public morality." He leans inside, sniffing, actually sniffing, as if hot cider might be detectable from a distance. He scans your house, your barren walls, your undecorated hearth, your sad little candle that flickers like it's apologizing for existing. He nods in approval. "See that it stays this way," he warns. You close the door and sag against it, your whole body deflating like a medieval beanbag chair. That was close. Too close. You briefly consider never inhaling again, just to be safe. Outside, you hear them continue their patrol. They stop at your neighbor's house next. You listen intently as they question the poor woman about a pie scent that accidentally escaped her chimney. She insists it's turnip mush. They insist it smells festively seasoned. She insists it isn't. Eventually they make her show them the pot. It's grey. It's sad. They leave disappointed. This is the emotional cycle of the Puritan Christmas police. Suspicion, accusation, disappointment, repeat. Let's talk about why they're so committed. Winter in the 17th century is bleak. People are hungry, cold, bored, and generally one inconvenience away from screaming into the void. The Puritans believed keeping everyone somber and controlled would prevent sin from spreading like a seasonal flu. They feared chaos, disorder, dancing, drunkenness, and, judging by their faces, possibly the concept of joy itself. But here's the irony. The more they patrol, the more they restrict, the more people rebel. Quietly, sneakily, joyfully. Behind closed doors, someone hums a carol. Someone shares a spiced potato. Someone lights a candle in a way that could be interpreted as hopeful. And the Puritan Christmas police, despite their best efforts, their wide hats, and their legendary frowns, can't quite stamp that out. Because even when Christmas is banned, people still find a way to keep a little spark alive. And nothing drives the Puritans crazier than that. You wander towards a suspicious alley and meet a woman whispering, "Pies. Very illegal. Very fresh. Congratulations. You have just entered the baked goods underworld." The alley is dimly lit by a single lantern swinging on a rusty hook, casting wobbly shadows that make her look like she's part human, part smoke, part pastry goddess. She stands there, hunched, bundled in layers of wool, eyes darting left and right like she's expecting a Puritan to drop from the rooftop and confiscate her rolling pin. You inch closer. because there is no force in the known universe stronger than the scent drifting her way. Warm spices, stewed fruit, and a rebellious amount of butter. It smells like comfort. It smells like danger. It smells like Christmas, which is exactly why it's banned. Before you say a word, she holds up a hand, silencing you with the authority of someone who's been in the pastry business far too long. Don't say mince pie out loud, she warns. Call it bread with intentions. You nod solemnly. Bread with intentions. Of course. She opens her cloak slightly, not seductively, but in the manner of someone revealing illegal baked goods sewn into hidden pockets. Inside are rows of tiny mince pies wrapped in cloth, still steaming. If she had the same setup in the 21st century, she'd be on an episode of a baking competition show that she would definitely win. Let's talk about mince pies for a moment. The 17th century version was not the sweet, dainty treat you know today. These things were packed with meat, fruit, fat, and spices, an unholy fusion of dessert and dinner. The flavor was rich, warm, savory, sweet, and possibly a little alarming. But in a winter where hope is thin and porridge is mandatory, it tasted like heaven riding a goose, because it used spices. And spices meant celebration, and celebration meant sin. And sin meant the Puritans clutched their hats so hard they left dents. Which is why you are now lurking in an alley, negotiating with a woman who conducts her pastry trade like a medieval crime lord. She gestures for you to follow her deeper into the shadows. You obey, stepping around puddles that look suspiciously like melted snow mixed with despair. She lifts a wooden crate and reveals even more pies, large ones, small ones, aggressively spiced ones. 2 coppers each, she says. 3 if you want the good crust. You gasp because you didn't even know there was good crust anymore. You fumble for coins, hands shaking like you're making a drug deal because, honestly, this feels very much like a drug deal. The illegal substance is nutmeg. You hand her the coins and she hands you a pie. It is warm, warm enough to thaw your fingers. You hold it like a newborn child. You are extremely eager to eat. But then you hear footsteps, heavy ones, boots, 2 sets. You and the pie woman lock eyes, a silent exchange of sheer panic. She blows out the lantern. You duck behind a barrel. She ducks behind you. You crouch lower to compensate. 2 Puritan officers stride into the alley. Their hats block the moonlight, casting shadows so judgmental they feel physical. One sniffs the air, nose twitching like a truffle pig, trained to detect joy. "I smell cinnamon," he mutters. Your heart stops. Your pie stops steaming. Your soul leaves your body. The officers scan the alley. They approach the barrel. They pause. Then one says, "It's probably from the baker's house. He reheated cabbage last night." The other grimaces. That explains it. They move on. You remain frozen for a full 30 seconds, holding your breath in case it also smells festive. When the coast is finally clear, the pie woman pats you on the shoulder. "Good instincts," she whispers. "You'd survive in this business." You look down at the pie in your hands. Illegal, warm, perfect. And then, slowly, oh so slowly, you take a bite. It tastes like Christmas. It tastes like rebellion. It tastes like everything you're not supposed to have. And you realize, in that tiny, steaming alley, that no matter how hard the Puritans try, they will never defeat pastry. Even without Christmas, December smells like a combination of wet wool, tallow candles, and citrus someone dropped in a chamber pot. You begin missing modern air fresheners with a new intensity. The odor hits you the second you step outside, an invisible wall of historical honesty that slaps your senses awake. You cough, not delicately, loudly. The man passing you nods with sympathy, as if to say, "Yes, the air has flavor today." Let's talk about medieval winter smells. Winter doesn't erase odors, it traps them. No breeze strong enough to carry away the village's natural perfume. No ventilation, except for the holes in the walls, which mainly serve to funnel cold directly onto your spine. Everything is wet. Everything is unwashed. Everything is marinating. And without Christmas, without fragrant spices simmering in pots, without sweet bread baking in ovens, without greenery hung indoors to freshen the air, the village smells like what it truly is, a collection of humans, animals, damp clothing, and questionable decision-making. You walk past the blacksmith's house and encounter the rich aroma of burning metal mixed with sweat. A few steps later, the butcher's hut contributes its signature note. A bouquet of raw meat, sawdust, and existential dread. You inhale and immediately regret it. Then comes the wool. Everyone is wearing it. Everyone is soaking it. Everyone is heating it, just enough to release its enchanting fragrance of sheep. But warm and tired. Wet wool has a smell so distinctive it could be bottled and sold as a medieval cologne called Eau de Survival. You tug your cloak tighter around you and realize you are part of the problem. You sniff yourself. It's not good. You smell like a hay bale that tried its best but ultimately gave up. Let's talk about household smells. Inside homes, the scent situation becomes even more layered. Fireplaces fill the air with wood smoke that clings to your skin like a needy toddler. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, add a greasy undertone that coats the back of your throat. Every room smells faintly of stew, faintly of dirt, and strongly of wheel clean in spring. With Christmas band, there are no scented pine branches hanging on rafters, no cloves in oranges, no mulled ale wafting through kitchens. The smells that once gently fought the background stench are gone, leaving the raw essence of medieval life exposed. It is not festive. It is not jolly. It is aggressively honest. You enter a neighbor's cottage hoping for relief, but the air inside is thicker, heavier, like the house has been storing odors all year and finally decided to share. You sit by the fire and immediately receive a faceful of smoke. Your eyes water. Your nose contemplates quitting. Your neighbor apologizes. Sorry about the smell. The dog was damp earlier. You look around. They do not have a dog. At this point, you would pay a king's ransom for a pine-scented candle, a lavender diffuser, a citrus spray, even one of those cheap store-bought car air fresheners shaped like a tree. Anything that smells like something nature intended. But you have none of that. Instead, you have cabbage. Not fresh cabbage, boiled cabbage, which leaves behind a smell so powerful it feels like it seeps into your dreams. You step back outside. The cold air, at least, numbs your nostrils. Snow falls, soft and quiet, temporarily freshening the world by covering the odors like a giant, forgiving white blanket. And yet, as the day goes on, you begin to acclimate. You catch yourself thinking, well, maybe it's not so bad. You start identifying scents like a sommelier of misery. Ah, yes. Hints of wet straw, undertones of goat, a finish of slightly burned soup. You realize the strangest thing of all. People here aren't miserable about it. They shrug, they laugh, they carry on. Because in a world without plumbing, deodorant, or detergent, The smell of December is simply part of life, like frostbite, communal gossip, and the occasional barn fire. And slowly, very slowly, the smell stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like history. Since Christmas is banned, the government has decided it should be an extra work day. Nothing says festive spirit like hauling turnips while shivering under a grey sky that looks like it's judging you. You stand there in the frozen field, staring at the pile of turnips like they've personally wronged you. Your fingers are numb, your toes are numb. You're pretty sure your soul is numb. The only part of you still functioning emotionally is the tiny voice in your head whispering, "This was supposed to be a holiday." But no, not this year. The Puritans have decreed that the birth of Christ should be celebrated by doing more work. Hard work, cold work, work that makes your back ache in new and exciting ways. You've never hated a vegetable more in your life. And you once choked on a beet. Let's talk about how work days feel in midwinter. The ground is frozen solid, like a crusty piece of historical lasagna. Every time you try to dig, the earth pushes back with the confidence of someone who has never once been tilled willingly. Your breath forms little clouds which drift upward like they're leaving your body out of protest. Everyone around you is moving at the pace of people who have accepted misery as a core personality trait. There's Thomas, dragging a cart of root vegetables with the resigned expression of a man who was absolutely planning on getting drunk today. There's Margaret, chopping firewood so aggressively you suspect she's imagining it's the face of a Puritan official. And then there's you, clutching turnips like you're reenacting a tragic play called Why Is This My Life? Your supervisor, because of course someone is supervising today, wanders around shouting reminders that idleness is sinful. He keeps saying things like, "Onward, onward," while contributing nothing to the workload. Supervisors throughout history have remained shockingly consistent. You try to motivate yourself with small, encouraging thoughts. At least I'm not being fined. At least I'm not being interrogated for smelling like nutmeg. At least these turnips are only moderately heavy. But nothing helps, because it's still winter, and it's still miserable. And deep down, you know you should be eating something warm indoors, instead of doing cardio with root vegetables. At midday, you take a break. Everyone gathers around a communal pot of something that can only be described as liquid sadness. It's a thin broth made of cabbage, water, and whatever emotions people shed into it. You sip it slowly, trying to convince yourself it's nourishing. It tastes like damp hope. Next to you, someone mutters, "This used to be a merry day." Someone else sighs wistfully and says, "Remember feasts?" A third person adds, "Remember warmth?" Everyone nods, staring into their bowls like philosophers, contemplating the futility of winter. Let's talk about how your body feels. Your hands are so cold that when you try to flex your fingers, they move with the enthusiasm of wet noodles. Your nose drips, your knees ache, your shoulders feel like they've been replaced with two medieval sacks of rocks. Your joints pop whenever you bend down, sounding like someone stepping on old firewood. In the distance, you hear a church bell, but not for a service. No singing, no gathering. Just a loud reminder that time continues to move, even when your happiness does not. Eventually, you get back to work. You haul, you lift, you stack. You do all the physically demanding tasks that absolutely should not be scheduled on what should have been a holiday. You keep catching yourself humming softly, instinctively, but stop immediately every time. If anyone hears you sounding even vaguely melodic, you'll be assigned more chores for having excess joy. By the time the sky darkens, your limbs have turned into heavy, unresponsive decorations of your own suffering. You are a human scarecrow wearing frostbite as an accessory. Your supervisor finally announces that the workday is over. Everyone groans, not loudly, but with the collective despair of people who just want one day off in their entire bleak historical existence. You trudge home, dragging your feet through slush that somehow manages to feel colder than the actual air. Your arms are sore. Your back is stiff. Your dignity is questionable. You collapse onto your straw mattress, thinking one final thought before sleep claims you. If this is the alternative to illegal Christmas, I would like my illegal Christmas back. And honestly, you're not alone. You try to have a tiny celebration at home. Maybe a candle, maybe a prayer. But your candle flickers suspiciously, and within minutes your nosy neighbors assume you're smuggling joy. You were aiming for subtlety. Something small, quiet, humble. The kind of celebration that could pass for just trying not to stub my toes in the dark. But apparently, even minimal light in December looks guilty. The moment that candle flares with even the faintest enthusiasm, you hear the unmistakable creak of your neighbor's door opening. That's when you realize you've made a mistake. Let's talk about neighbors in a no-Christmas world. Your neighbors, despite being tired, cold, and chronically underfed, maintain the hypervigilance of middle-aged adults who've spent decades perfecting the art of neighborhood surveillance. They are the living embodiment of "I wasn't judging you, but I did notice." They peek through shutters. They shuffle loudly past windows. They cough pointedly in your direction. They observe your candlelight like it's evidence in a trial. The problem is, everyone misses Christmas. Everyone. And the moment they see even the tiniest hint of it happening next door, they experience a Pavlovian response. Suspicion mixed with hope, mixed with the desperate desire to be invited. Your candle, unfortunately, sends all the wrong signals. It flickers a little too warmly, a little too softly, a little too cheerfully. You might as well have put a glowing neon sign outside that reads, "Joy. This way." Someone knocks on your door, lightly, but with the persistence of someone trying to pretend they're not checking up on you. You panic. You blow out the candle so fast, the room inhales darkness like it's been starved. You yank open the door and come face to face with your neighbor Judith, wrapped in a cloak, eyes narrowed with suspicion, nose twitching like she's sniffing for cinnamon. "Is everything all right?" she asks, in the tone people use when they are 90% certain everything is not all right. You insist everything is fine. Perfect. Utterly non-festive. You even gesture toward your home like a medieval real estate agent, showing off a property with absolutely no signs of holiday contraband. Judith hums thoughtfully. She does not believe you. She tilts her head. "I thought I saw warmth." You swallow. "That was an accident." She nods slowly. Too slowly. Then she walks away, but not before giving your door a parting glance, so judgmental it could curdle milk. You shut the door. You exhale, and then you hear it. More footsteps. Let's talk about gossip velocity. In a village of bored, underemployed winter residents, rumors travel at a supernatural speed. You barely had a candle lit for 10 seconds, yet now 3 people have walked by your house. 2 have just happened to sweep their steps. 1 has tripped over absolutely nothing but took the opportunity to linger on your walkway. It's worse. Someone knocks again, much louder this time. It's your other neighbor, Henry, who looks like the type of man who hasn't smiled since the last monarch died. He stares at you with the intensity of someone trying to detect elicit joy through sheer force of will. I heard singing, he declares. You blink. From where? He squints suspiciously. From somewhere. This is how hysteria spreads. One warm candle, one ambiguous rumor, one single villager who mistakes the sound of wind for the sound of prayer. You reassure Henry firmly that no illegal celebrations are happening. No singing, no feasting, no suppressed giggles, no joyful exhalations. He stares a moment longer, decides you're either truthful or not worth the paperwork, and finally trudges away. You shut the door again and lean against it, feeling the exhaustion of someone who has just battled the world's mildest mob. Let's talk about your tiny celebration. You sit down, relight the candle, this time cupping it with your hands like you're shielding a scandal. You whisper a small prayer, barely audible, just a quiet hope for warmth, safety, and maybe a decent harvest. This time, the candle behaves. It doesn't flicker wildly. It doesn't act suspicious. It burns steady and calm, lighting your little corner of the world with a gentle glow. You let yourself relax for 5 whole seconds. Then, a loud knock. The door flies open. It's Judith again. I brought you stew, she announces, shoving a bowl into your hands. Because if you are celebrating, she lowers her voice dramatically. I expect to be invited next time. You stare at her. So that's what this was about. Not suspicion, not judgment, pure fear of missing out. You laugh, quietly, carefully, and close the door behind her. Your candle flickers approvingly, and you realize the truth. Celebrating quietly is impossible, but celebrating together, that might just be worth the risk. You meet the man responsible for enforcing the ban. His face suggests he's never smiled voluntarily. He gives the impression that if he caught you enjoying anything, he'd confiscate it. He stands in the village square like a monument to emotional austerity. Cloak perfectly, straight, hat brim perfectly symmetrical, lips pressed so tightly together they might forge diamonds. He isn't just a magistrate, he is the living embodiment of absolutely not. You approach him cautiously, the way one approaches a sleeping dragon or a hedgehog in a bad mood. He watches you with eyes that have all the warmth of a frozen pond. This man did not merely sign the Christmas ban, he probably lobbied for it. Let's talk about Puritan magistrates. These weren't just bureaucrats. These were men who believed the world was full of moral traps. Dancing, dangerous, decorations, suspect, singing, downright reckless. They feared joy the way modern people fear unexpected phone calls. The magistrate before you likely considers laughter a gateway sin and caroling a felony. He clears his throat. The sound is sharp and papery, like someone snapping a dry twig in a cold forest. Citizen, he says, in a tone that suggests you have already disappointed him. He looks you up and down, scanning for contraband festivity. Your cloak? Too colorful. Your boots? Possibly polished to an inappropriate shine. Your expression? Not miserable enough. He narrows his eyes. What is the purpose of your wandering? He asks. Wandering? You were simply walking, but under his gaze, you suddenly feel like you might have been skipping, maybe humming, maybe glittering with unlicensed whimsy. You stammer something about going to fetch firewood, which is technically true in the sense that you could be doing that later. He pauses. Silence stretches. A long, unbearable moment. Then he leans forward and inhales. He is sniffing you. You freeze as he tests the air around you for any trace of spices, sugar, or pine. He's like a bloodhound trained specifically to detect merriment. After a moment, he steps back, apparently satisfied that you do not smell like celebration. Good, he says. We've had infractions. You nod sympathetically. He continues, warming up the way an old oven might, very slowly and without ever reaching full heat. He tells you, in great detail, about the recent crimes plaguing the town. Someone baked a loaf of bread that was too round and cheerful. Someone else arranged logs in the hearth, in a way that resembled a festive star. Another criminal outlaw put a sprig of ivy in her window. Symbolic rebellion, he calls it gravely, as though she had committed high treason using botanical accessories. As he speaks, you begin to notice the physical symptoms of his life's work. He has the stance of a man who has spent years trying to stop people from smiling. His jaw is tense, like it's been locked since childhood. His eyebrows are permanently furrowed. His hands are clasped behind his back, probably to keep them from confiscating things instinctively. He walks you through his daily routine. Inspect chimneys for illicit scents. Inspect doorways for greenery. Inspect people for unreasonable warmth. He says all of this proudly, as if he's saving civilization from the perils of cinnamon. Then, out of nowhere, he asks, "You haven't heard any singing recently, have you?" Your blood pressure skyrockets. You definitely heard whisper caroling behind a barn last night. But you respond with a quick, "No, sir," delivered at the emotional temperature of lukewarm oatmeal. He nods, satisfied. Good. Singing leads to chaos. You're not sure how to respond to that. You murmur something neutral like, "Of course." And he seems pleased by your bland acceptance of his worldview. And then, just when you think the encounter is over, he gives you the kind of look usually reserved for suspicious livestock. He leans slightly closer and whispers, "If you see anything celebratory, report it. You promise you will." You have no intention of doing so. He studies you one last time, then turns sharply and marches away, cloak snapping behind him like an angry curtain. You exhale for the first time in what feels like a century. As you watch him disappear down the road, interrogating a snowman-shaped pile of firewood as he passes, you realize something important. This man isn't just anti-Christmas. He's anti-anything that looks like it might generate serotonin. And unfortunately for him, even a winter this bleak can't fully smother human cheer. The magistrate is fighting a hopeless battle, armed with nothing but a frown and a hat. Cooks are slipping spices into pots like they're trading state secrets. A sprinkle of nutmeg feels like an act of defiance. A roasted apple feels like treason. You never thought you'd see the day when kitchens looked more like covert operations than places where food is made. But here you are, standing in a dim, smoky room where everything smells suspiciously delicious. The hearth glows warmly, too warmly, if you ask the Puritans, and the cooks move with the alertness of people who know one wrong aroma could get them fined for culinary joy. Let's talk about spices as contraband. In this era, spices are expensive, precious, sometimes used as actual currency. But during a Christmas ban, they become something else entirely. Clues. Cinnamon? Guilty. Cloves? Guilty. Anything that smells remotely cheerful? Very guilty. That's why the cooks lean over their pots like jewel thieves. One glances over each shoulder before slipping in the tiniest dusting of nutmeg, so small it should legally be considered a suggestion rather than an ingredient. Still, she stirs fast, as if trying to whisk away the evidence. Another cook is roasting apples. Roasting apples. A completely normal activity 11 months out of the year. But now, treason adjacent. The apples sizzle loudly, betraying the operation. The cook smacks the pan with her spoon and hisses, "Quiet," at the fruit. You stand in awe as the kitchen bustles around you. There's the butcher, pretending the large goose on the table is just an unusually shaped turnip. There's the baker, kneading dough with the seriousness of a man forging a weapon. There's an old woman stirring a pot of something thick, brown, and sweet, while muttering, "If anyone asks, it's gruel." Very festive gruel. It does not smell like gruel. Let's talk about the smells. Christmas, or the banned version of it, has a scent. Warmth, spice, sugary hope, roasted things, stewed things, things that make your stomach growl so loudly it could be used as a church bell. These smells drift out of kitchens no matter how hard the cooks try to contain them. They stuff rags under doors. They tape shutters with wax. They send children outside to wave blankets in the air like anxious scarecrows. But somehow, a single rogue scent molecule escapes into the village square, carrying with it the incriminating whisper of something tasty is happening. That's when tension spikes, the cooks freeze, the children duck. Someone yells, "Snuff the fire," and half the room descends into frantic chaos. The apple roaster grabs a bucket of water and then reconsiders because she likes the apples too much. The baker covers his dough with his entire body like he's shielding a newborn. But the smell dissipates harmlessly. For now, let's talk about recipes. Every family has a recipe passed down through generations. Normally people share them proudly. But this year, recipes are whispered, memorized, hidden. You watch as one woman carefully hands another a slip of parchment, folded 3 times. The recipient opens it, gasps softly, and says, "You trust me with the pudding?" It feels like watching someone accept an ancient relic. You're invited to help. Someone hands you a bowl and tells you to mix, like your life depends on it. You obey. You don't know what you're mixing. It looks thick, dark, and vaguely sticky. But the cooks nod approvingly, which means you've done it correctly. Then comes the big moment, tasting. A single spoonful is passed around like a sacrament. Everyone takes a tiny sip, eyes fluttering shut, savoring forbidden comfort. When it's your turn, you take a cautious taste. It's warm, it's sweet, it's slightly burnt, it's perfect. You almost cry. Let's talk about how dangerous this is. If the constable walked in right now, he'd have a field day. This room is dripping with evidence of joy. Suspiciously plump bread, questionably fragrant stew, fruitcakes that definitely contain more dried fruit than the law allows. But that's what makes this kitchen feel magical. Not the food, not the spices, not even the camaraderie. It's the defiance. Every stir, sprinkle, roast, and simmer is a reminder that humans will always find a way to celebrate, even when joy is outlawed. Especially when joy is outlawed. You leave the kitchen later, clothes infused with the unmistakable scent of rebellion. You're full, warm, and buzzing with the thrill of having participated in a culinary uprising. And you realize something simple. This isn't just cooking. It's resistance, stewed, baked, and seasoned to perfection. And it tastes like hope. Everyone denies attending Mass. Absolutely not. Perish the thought. Which is why the entire village is quietly walking toward the barn behind the mill. At exactly the same time, you join the procession like a guilty duckling, shuffling through the cold night with your shoulders hunched, and your breath fogging in tiny puffs of incriminating steam. No one speaks. No one makes eye contact. Everyone has perfected the facial expression of, "I am merely out for a night stroll, officer," which would be more convincing if 30 people weren't doing it simultaneously in single file. The barn looms in the darkness, an enormous wooden shadow with gaps between the planks that leak warm light. You can hear faint sounds inside, shifting hay, a cough, someone whispering, "You stepped on my foot," and the unmistakable creak of people trying to sit on wooden benches quietly. You enter through a side door normally reserved for goats. It seems fitting. Inside, the atmosphere is warm. Not physically, because the only heat sources are candles and body heat, but warm in the way that humans generate warmth simply by being crammed close together in an act of shared, illegal optimism. Your cloak brushes against sacks of grain. The straw rustles beneath your feet. A lone lantern flickers dramatically, like it's trying to set the tone. The entire setup feels like a spiritual speakeasy, a holiness hideout, a faith-flavored secret club. Nothing says devotion like risking fines to stand in a barn that smells faintly of hay, sheep breath, and the lingering aroma of whatever the miller spilled last week. Let's talk about why everyone is here. The Puritans banned Christmas services because they believed holiday masses encouraged revelry, feasting, and dangerously elevated levels of communal joy. But villagers, being human, still crave ritual, especially in the cold, bleak, endlessly damp middle of winter. So here they are, gathered in the least majestic location imaginable, attempting to create a sacred experience between bales of hay. The priest tonight is actually the cooper, yes, the man who makes barrels, because the real minister is under watch. The cooper climbs onto an overturned bucket that he uses as a podium. It wobbles. Everyone pretends not to notice. He begins the service in a whisper, a literal whisper. The first words of the Mass slip softly into the hay-scented air, gentle enough that if a Puritan magistrate burst in right now, he'd probably accuse the cooper of practicing quiet meditation instead of illegal worship. But slowly, beautifully, the murmurs grow just enough to be heard. Not loud, not bold, just present. Candles flicker against wooden beams, casting soft halos of light. A cow in the adjacent stall shifts and lets out a sleepy grunt, which somehow adds to the ambience instead of ruining it. The villagers bow their heads. The cooper reads scripture from a page so worn it looks like it survived several generations of hiding. Then comes the moment of danger, the singing. It begins with one voice, then two, then a careful handful more. The hymn is familiar, soft and profoundly hesitant, half prayer, half apology. The notes hang in the air like delicate snowflakes that must not fall too loudly. You join in quietly, your voice barely a breath. It feels intimate, secret, rebellious, and oddly comforting. And then a sudden gust of wind rattles the barn door. Everyone freezes. A candle sputters. Someone gasps like they've been stabbed by a hymn. You all stare at the entrance, waiting for the Puritan Christmas police to burst in and shout indignation. But the door simply shifts, then settles. No boots, no hats, no doom. Collectively, everyone exhales. The cooper clears his throat, whispers, "As we were," and the Mass resumes in its tiny, illegal glory. Near the end, a basket is passed around containing scraps of bread so small they look like communion croutons. There is no wine, just water that someone swears was once no wine. Spiritually speaking, everyone accepts their morsel gratefully. When the Mass is finished, no one claps, no one speaks. People file out silently, slipping back into the cold night one by one, pretending once again to be casual nocturnal wanderers. As you leave, you glance back at the barn. The last candle flickers out, and the doorway goes dark, and you realize something gently profound. Sometimes the holiest moments are the ones whispered in the shadows. shared between people determined to keep a spark alive, even when the world tries to smother it. Tonight wasn't just a midnight mass. It was a quiet act of defiance wrapped in hay. Somehow, the secrecy makes the small moments sweeter. Sharing a crust of bread with honey feels rebellious. Whispering Merry Christmas feels like high treason. You never expected holiday cheer to feel like contraband. But here you are, heart racing because someone just slipped you half a dried fig under a table like it's state secrets. You take a bite, and it tastes better than any feast you've ever had, not because the fig is delicious, but because you're eating it in defiance of a government that thinks joy is morally hazardous. Let's talk about forbidden delight. When a holiday is banned, every tiny scrap of happiness becomes supercharged. A smile shared too long becomes suspicious. A candle lit too warmly becomes questionable. A hand resting on your shoulder, meant only to comfort, feels like a clandestine moment of camaraderie the authorities definitely wouldn't approve of. You walk down the frosty lane with your hood pulled low, watching your breath puff out like guilty smoke. The world is quiet, not peaceful, but expectant. Every cottage you pass looks dark and ordinary, but you know inside those walls people are participating in micro-festivities. Illegal warmth, outlawed kindness, unlicensed joy. Nothing big, nothing bold, just things. Little things. You duck into your neighbor's cottage, pretending you're only there to borrow a tool. That's the official story. The unofficial story is that she has a pot of something warm simmering on the hearth. It smells faintly of apples and maybe a hint of spice. Nothing too festive, nothing that could incriminate her. Just enough to taste like hope if you let it. She hands you a wooden cup. You sip carefully. The drink is watered-down cider. But in a world where celebration is practically a felony, the sweetness warms you from the inside. You thank her with a smile. A real one. She returns it, glancing toward the window nervously, as though smiles themselves might echo. Even the light in the room feels different. Softer, like it's trying not to get caught. Let's talk about whisper wishes. Normally, Merry Christmas is said loudly, with cheer, gusto, and a mouthful of pudding. Here, the phrase is barely a breath, like people are passing around a dangerous spell. Saying it feels like placing your hand over a candle flame, risky, thrilling, stupid but irresistible. You join a small gathering behind someone's house, all of you pretending you're just checking a fence post. Everyone stands awkwardly close, pretending they have important fence-related opinions. Eventually someone mutters, "Merry," then stops, looks around, and finishes with a whisper so soft it barely qualifies as sound. The group smiles in silence. Just a dozen humans liking each other quietly. And you realize something remarkable. The ban has changed, nothing essential. It has only altered the volume. Let's talk about the sensory magic of forbidden joy. You tear off a corner of bread and drizzle it with honey. Precious, expensive honey that someone has been hoarding for months. It gleams in the lamplight like liquid gold. You take a bite. It tastes like everything the season should be, but isn't allowed to be. Warm, sweet, comforting, alive. Even the cold outside feels different when you step into it afterward. Less oppressive, as though the warmth you just shared has followed you out, clinging to your skin like an invisible rebellion. And then there are the secret glances, the knowing looks exchanged between neighbors when a constable walks by, the suppressed laughter when someone tries to hide a gingerbread smell by burning cabbage, the huddled conversations at water pumps where people talk in code about the goose-shaped thing that might happen later. All of it makes the holiday feel less like an occasion and more like a conspiracy. A cheerful, ridiculous conspiracy. And here's the ironic part. The Puritans wanted to eliminate disorder, excess, chaos, and distraction. Instead, they created a holiday more emotionally intense than any official celebration could ever be. Because now, joy must be earned. Crafted, snuck, shared carefully. Tonight, as you lie on your straw mattress, listening to the faint sounds of wind and distant, muffled whisper singing, you feel a strange contentment settle over you. Not loud contentment, not flashy, just a small, glowing ember in your chest. It turns out joy becomes sweeter when it has to survive. And somehow that makes this forbidden Christmas feel more magical than any feast ever could. You try to picture a future with twinkle lights, ugly sweaters, and inflatable snowmen. It all sounds ridiculous, and yet, somehow, less ridiculous than this. You stare at the dim glow of your lone tallow candle, its wavering flame casting shadows that look suspiciously like a sad turkey trying to take flight. Outside, the cold wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the air smells faintly of smoke, wool, and a stew someone gave up on halfway through. It is not festive. It is not merry. It is not anything other than functional. So naturally, your mind decides to imagine a world where Christmas becomes nice. You start small. Maybe one day people will hang lights, actual lights, outside their homes. Bright ones. Colorful ones. Ones that blink on purpose, not because the candle wick is having an emotional episode. You try to picture strings of tiny glowing bulbs outlining rooftops, fences, entire streets. The thought is so outrageous you nearly laugh out loud, and then immediately stop, because laughing loudly is how you get investigated. Then you imagine music, not whispered carols behind barns, not humming through your scarf. You imagine people blasting joyful, overly enthusiastic songs in public. Songs about snow and bells and fictional reindeer with questionable nasal conditions. People singing loudly and badly. And somehow, that being the point. That feels even more far-fetched than the lights. You close your eyes, leaning back against the wall as the candle flickers. Let's talk about the sweaters. You've seen sweaters. You've worn sweaters. They're practical, itchy, usually brown, and often smell like the sheep they once were. But future sweaters, these ugly sweaters you're imagining, are something else entirely. Bright, patterned, shamelessly festive, decorated with reindeer, snowflakes, and slogans that sound aggressively cheerful. You picture them being worn proudly, not hidden under cloaks like some sort of shameful textile. You try to envision an entire family posing for a portrait while wearing matching ones. It's so absurd it wraps around to being kind of charming. Then your mind wanders to the idea of inflatable snowmen. Inflatable. Snowmen. You have no concept of inflatable technology, so your brain supplies the closest approximation. A giant sack of flour shaped like a man, puffed up with air, looming cheerfully in someone's yard. It's deeply unsettling. You assume these future people must be very brave. Yet despite the absurdity, all of this imaginary cheer seems pleasant, safe, fun. The opposite of your current reality, where every whiff of cinnamon is grounds for suspicion and twigs of holly are treated like political statements. Let's talk about the fear. You don't realize how tightly you carry it until you imagine its absence. The constant need to hide your joy, to speak in coded holiday language, to pretend your warm drink is medicinal. It wears on you like an itchy wool tunic that never softens. The thought of a future where people celebrate openly, loudly, legally, it feels like a fairy tale, a ridiculous, over-the-top, sugar-coated fairy tale. But a fairy tale all the same. You imagine children waiting excitedly for a mysterious figure who brings gifts. Someone jolly, someone magical, someone who is definitely not a magistrate. It's such a foreign concept that your brain short-circuits for a moment. You're used to authority figures bringing fines, not presents, and you imagine homes filled with warmth, not just fire warmth, but emotional warmth, families gathering without fear, neighbors sharing food openly, laughter that doesn't have to be muffled under blankets. You inhale slowly, letting the fantasy sink in. The candle burns lower. The night grows colder. The wind howls through the cracks like it's trying to file a formal complaint about winter itself. But for the first time in a long time, the world feels a little lighter. Not because the ban has lifted, not because the Puritans have eased their grip, but because you've allowed yourself to imagine something better, something ridiculous and bright and full of unrestrained joy. You open your eyes and smile softly, just for yourself. Maybe someday people will celebrate without fear. Maybe holidays will be silly, loud, and legal. Maybe inflatable snowmen will stand proudly on lawns, confusing everyone. And maybe, just maybe, that world will make more sense than the one you're living in now. You try to picture a future with twinkle lights, ugly sweaters, and inflatable snowmen. It all sounds ridiculous. And yet, somehow, less ridiculous than this. You stare at the dim glow of your lone tallow candle, its wavering flame casting shadows that look suspiciously like a sad turkey trying to take flight. Outside, the cold wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the air smells faintly of smoke, wool, and a stew someone gave up on halfway through. It is not festive, it is not merry. It is not anything other than functional. So naturally, your mind decides to imagine a world where Christmas becomes nice. You start small. Maybe one day people will hang lights, actual lights, outside their homes, bright ones, colorful ones. Ones that blink on purpose, not because the candle wick is having an emotional episode. You try to picture strings of tiny glowing bulbs outlining rooftops, fences, entire streets. The thought is so outrageous you nearly laugh out loud, and then immediately stop, because laughing loudly is how you get investigated. Then you imagine music, not whispered carols behind barns, not humming through your scarf. You imagine people blasting joyful, overly enthusiastic songs in public, songs about snow, and bells and fictional reindeer with questionable nasal conditions, people singing loudly and badly, and somehow that being the point. That feels even more far-fetched than the lights. You close your eyes, leaning back against the wall as the candle flickers. Let's talk about the sweaters. You've seen sweaters. You've worn sweaters. They're practical, itchy, usually brown, and often smell like the sheep they once were. But future sweaters, these ugly sweaters you're imagining, are something else entirely. Bright, patterned, shamelessly festive, decorated with reindeer, snowflakes, and slogans that sound aggressively cheerful. You picture them being worn proudly, not hidden under cloaks like some sort of shameful textile. You try to envision an entire family posing for a portrait while wearing matching ones. It's so absurd it wraps around to being kind of charming. Then your mind wanders to the idea of inflatable snowmen. Inflatable. Snowmen. You have no concept of inflatable technology. So your brain supplies the closest approximation. A giant sack of flour shaped like a man, puffed up with air, looming cheerfully in someone's yard. It's deeply unsettling. You assume these future people must be very brave. Yet, despite the absurdity, All of this imaginary cheer seems pleasant, safe, fun, the opposite of your current reality, where every whiff of cinnamon is grounds for suspicion and twigs of holly are treated like political statements. Let's talk about the fear. You don't realize how tightly you carry it until you imagine its absence. The constant need to hide your joy, to speak in coded holiday language, to pretend your warm drink is medicinal. It wears on you like an itchy wool tunic that never softens. The thought of a future where people celebrate openly, loudly, legally, it feels like a fairy tale. A ridiculous, over-the-top, sugar-coated fairy tale. But a fairy tale all the same. You imagine children waiting excitedly for a mysterious figure who brings gifts. Someone jolly. Someone magical. Someone who is definitely not a magistrate. It's such a foreign concept that your brain short-circuits for a moment. You're used to authority figures bringing fines, not presents. And you imagine homes filled with warmth, not just fire warmth, but emotional warmth. Families gathering without fear, neighbors sharing food openly, laughter that doesn't have to be muffled under blankets. You inhale slowly, letting the fantasy sink in. The candle burns lower. The night grows colder. The wind howls through the cracks like it's trying to file a formal complaint about winter itself. But for the first time in a long time, the world feels a little lighter. Not because the ban has lifted, not because the Puritans have eased their grip, but because you've allowed yourself to imagine something better, something ridiculous and bright and full of unrestrained joy. You open your eyes and smile softly, just for yourself. Maybe, someday, people will celebrate without fear. Maybe holidays will be silly, loud, and legal. Maybe inflatable snowmen will stand proudly on lawns, confusing everyone. And maybe, just maybe, that world will make more sense than the one you're living in now. Years later, when Christmas is reinstated, people celebrate with the intensity of a toddler reunited with sugar. Streets fill, bells ring, someone definitely passes out. You knew people missed Christmas. You knew. You did not understand the full scale of the collective emotional meltdown that would occur the moment the ban officially ended. It's like the entire country has been holding in a sneeze for a decade and finally someone said, "Go on then." The explosion is immediate. 1 second the announcement is made, and the next, the streets transform from bleak winter nothingness into full-blown festival chaos. People shove past one another in a frenzy, desperate to out-celebrate their neighbors, as if joy is limited and only the fastest will survive. Let's talk about the sound. It begins as a cheer, then becomes a roar, then transforms into a noise so loud and unhinged, it sounds like the sky itself is applauding. Bells ring from every direction. Some bells ring in tune. Others ring with the chaotic enthusiasm of someone who has never touched a bell but is now drunk on power. You step outside and feel the vibrations of the celebration in the ground beneath your feet. It's like the earth itself is saying, "Thank goodness, I was tired of all that Puritan energy." Let's talk about the decorations. People have clearly been storing things, hiding things, preparing things. Within minutes, windowsills sprout greenery, doors are covered in wreaths. Someone drags out an entire cartload of holly like they've been waiting 10 years to unleash it. Red ribbons pop up everywhere, tied onto anything that will sit still long enough. You watch as a man climbs onto his roof and starts decorating his chimney with such ferocity that you fear for both him and the structural integrity of his house. A woman next door is aggressively hanging candles in her windows, muttering, "They can find me now, I dare them." Children run wild, screaming "Merry Christmas" at volumes that would have summoned constables a week ago. Now the constables themselves are smiling. One even laughs. You look away quickly. Seeing a constable smile feels too intimate. Let's talk about the food. Every kitchen erupts into madness. People drag out the spices they hoarded like dragons guarding treasure. Goose roasts in ovens, pies multiply, bread seems to rise faster out of pure excitement. Steam pours from chimneys so thick you could navigate the village by smell alone. Someone hands you a cup of something warm and mulled and heavily spiced. You take a sip and immediately understand why the Puritans were afraid. This drink could inspire revolutions. It could make grown men sing. It could definitely make someone climb a tree for no reason. Nearby, a table collapses under the weight of an overambitious feast. The family cheers and starts eating off the ground. They don't care. No one cares. Let's talk about the unhinged energy. Someone starts dancing in the square. Someone else joins in. Someone else faints, probably from joy, possibly from alcohol, maybe from both. A group of self-appointed singers stands at the center of town, belting carols passionately and wildly off-key. They're not good. They're not coordinated, but they're louder than the bells, and people applaud like they're watching angels descend. Joy spreads like a contagion, finally a good one. You feel it too. Warmth, relief, delight, a loosening in your chest that you didn't know had been tight for years. Then the Lord of Misrule returns. Someone appoints him instantly. No one knows who he is, but he wears a makeshift crown and shouts orders like, "More figgy pudding," while people obey without hesitation. The Puritan magistrates try to maintain order, but end up being roped into a game involving fruit, sticks, and questionable rules. Let's talk about the aftermath. By evening, the village looks like it survived a joyful explosion. Decorations hang crookedly. People nap in corners. Half-eaten pies rest on windowsills. Children are sticky with sweets. Adults are sticky with ale. Everyone is smiling. You walk home through the remnants of the day. A little drunk on mulled cider. A little dizzy from laughter. A lot overwhelmed by the feeling of being human again. Christmas has returned. Loudly, messily, spectacularly. And you realize something simple, something obvious, something you've felt for years. Joy can be buried, but it cannot be killed. Not by bans, not by fines, not by anyone wearing a tall black hat. It always finds its way back. Loud, bright, chaotic, and utterly unstoppable. As you sit by a weak fire sipping your illegal ale, you realize Christmas has survived bans, plagues, Puritans, and centuries of bad cooking. It's basically immortal, like a cockroach, but festive. You swirl the ale in your cup, watching the weak fire sputter like it's trying its best, but honestly just needs a nap. The warmth barely reaches your fingers, but your thoughts drift far beyond your tiny cottage. They wander across centuries, over snow-covered roofs, through smoky kitchens, and down candlelit lanes, all leading to the same conclusion. Christmas is one of the most stubborn things humanity ever invented. Let's talk about endurance. Not the kind you need to survive winter in a drafty house, or the kind required to chew through medieval bread that doubles as self-defense. No, Christmas has its own kind of endurance, a weird, chaotic, unstoppable resilience that defies logic and common sense. You picture the holiday like a scrappy street cat that keeps getting shooed away but always turns up again at dawn, purring, completely unfazed, and somehow covered in glitter. It outlived the Roman Empire. It outlived several monarchs. It outlived the plague, which frankly deserves its own medal. It survived the Puritans, who tried to crush it under the weight of sermons, fines, and hats with dangerously tall brims. And through all of this, Christmas barely flinched. Sure, it changed hats a few times, sometimes religious, sometimes rowdy, sometimes suspiciously pagan, but it never actually disappeared. Let's talk about the bad cooking. You take another sip of ale and think of ancient feasts containing dishes that absolutely should have been outlawed. Boiled meats, mushy puddings, mystery pies, centuries of food that would give modern health inspectors heart palpitations. And yet, people kept making them, kept eating them, kept celebrating with meals that tasted like tradition mixed with mild danger. Somehow, that didn't kill Christmas either. You exhale slowly, watching your breath dissolve in the cold air of your cottage. Outside, snow falls quietly, soft, gentle, almost thoughtful. Snow always has a way of making the world feel timeless, like you could be in any century and still feel the same hush settling around you. That's when you realize something else. Christmas keeps coming back because people keep needing it. Not the feasting or the singing, or even the presents. Though, let's be honest, presents help. It's the light. Humans get weird in winter. The days shrink. The nights stretch. The cold creeps everywhere. You start questioning your life choices, your heating system, and your tolerance for wool. And just when everything feels bleak enough to make you consider hibernation, Christmas shuffles in wearing too many layers and carrying a candle. It says, "Here, have some warmth." Let's talk about the mood swings. History has never been emotionally stable. It's been through phases: apocalyptic, chaotic, deeply confused, occasionally wildly optimistic, and often profoundly grumpy. Christmas has had to adapt to all of them. When times were good, it grew big and loud and extravagant. When times were bad, it shrank down to a whisper in a barn. But it never stopped entirely. Even when banned, it simply went undercover like a holiday spy, appearing in coded greetings, secret feasts, hidden candles, and songs hummed at volumes that wouldn't wake a mouse. You sip more ale, feeling your chest warm despite the weak fire. The ale tastes slightly illegal, slightly sweet, slightly hopeful, and as you sit there, you can't help but marvel at the absurd resilience of it all. Christmas didn't just survive history. It outsmarted it. It ducked under swords. It tiptoed past plagues. It winked at tyrants and said, "You can't keep me down forever." And it was right, because here you are, sitting by a nearly useless fire, wrapped in a cloak that smells faintly of smoke and despair, thinking about a holiday that refuses to die. A holiday that returns year after year, bringing warmth to cold rooms, laughter to tired people, sweetness to bitter winters. A holiday that has seen the worst humanity can throw at it and still emerges with bells on. You raise your mug in a quiet toast to its ridiculous perseverance. Christmas, the cheerful cockroach of history. And thank goodness for it. You quickly learn that children are the biggest security risk in an anti-Christmas world. They can't help themselves. One kid hums a carol without realizing it. Another builds a snowman shaped vaguely like a festive saint. A third one yells, "Merry," before being tackled by his mother like a linebacker. Keeping kids non-festive is like trying to keep glitter out of your house. It is biologically impossible. You watch them play in the snow, badly concealed joy erupting from them like geysers. Their parents hover anxiously nearby, scanning the horizon for Puritan magistrates the same way modern parents scan for toddlers wielding permanent markers. Everyone's on high, alert, but the kids? The kids are living their best, partially illegal lives. Let's talk about children and winter. Children possess a supernatural ability to generate chaos, even in the bleakest environmental conditions. They can be freezing cold, underfed, and wearing wool that scratches like a judgmental cat, and somehow still find the energy to invent a game that is 30% fun and 70% potential lawsuit. Today's game seems to be throw snowballs and pretend it isn't festive. The children insist they are merely practicing winter warfare techniques, but the snowballs are suspiciously round, suspiciously jolly. One snowball even has a little sprig of something stuck to it. And when the constable walks by, the kids instantly drop everything and freeze like poorly disguised statues. The constable eyes them, the kids stare back, wide-eyed, dripping innocence and melted snow. After a tense moment, he grunts and moves on. They immediately resume throwing snowballs the second his back is turned. Kids are tiny rebels with underdeveloped impulse control. You notice a girl quietly humming as she builds a snow fort. The melody is unmistakably a carol, but whispered, soft, like her vocal cords are trying to dodge prosecution. Her mother rushes over and shushes her with frantic hand gestures, as if the very notes might summon a Puritan from a snowdrift. Then there's the snowman issue. Children in this era cannot resist building snow figures. But when Christmas is banned, snowmen are risky. Too many round features, too cheerful, too snowman-y. One boy proudly unveils his snow creation, a rotund figure with stick arms raised in a triumphant pose. The parents gasp. It looks exactly like St. Nicholas, minus the beard and legal recognition. Make it uglier! The boy's father hisses in panic. The kid complies immediately, giving the snowman a crooked face and a strange lump on the side of its head. Now it looks less like St. Nicholas and more like a lopsided potato with dreams. Crisis averted. Let's talk about the biggest threat. Spontaneous cheer. Kids don't ease into happiness the way adults do. They don't ration it. They don't hide it. It bursts out of them in sudden, uncontrollable explosions. A child will get excited about a stick, a pebble, a weirdly shaped icicle, and every spark of joy looks dangerously festive. Earlier, you saw a toddler shriek with delight because he found a pine cone. A pine cone! His mother nearly fainted trying to snatch it away before a Puritan saw him cradle the cone like a Christmas ornament. And then there's the merry incident. You hear it before you see it. A young boy comes racing out of a cottage, shouting at full volume, "Merry!" That's as far as he gets before his mother barrels into him with the force of someone who has tackled this exact problem 7 times already today. She claps a hand over his mouth, mid-syllable, and drags him inside like she's disposing of evidence. You hear muffled lecturing. You hear muffled protesting. You hear a muffled, half-finished riz. It is the sound of childhood rebellion. Even indoors, kids struggle. One little girl sneezes, and it somehow sounds like jingle. Her father stares at her like she's just spoken in tongues. Another child is caught arranging firewood into the shape of a star. It's geometry, he insists. No one believes him. Let's talk about why the children can't help themselves. It's because joy is natural, contagious, effervescent. You can suppress adults with laws, fines, sermons, and disappointment-heavy hats. But kids? They are pure instinct. They don't know how to hide delight. They don't understand bans. They just know winter feels magical, snow feels fun, and whispering forbidden words is thrilling. And honestly, they're the reason Christmas survives. Because every time a child laughs in the snow, or hums a tune, or constructs a dangerously cheerful snowman, they remind the village, quietly but insistently, That joy is stubborn. Joy wiggles through cracks. Joy giggles when you tell it to hush. As you watch a little girl twirl in slow circles, catching snowflakes on her tongue, you realize Christmas might be banned. Adults might fear fines. But children? Children are the holiday's most loyal, chaotic resistance fighters. And no government stands a chance against them. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your blankets and let the quiet of your room soften every edge of the day, take a moment to appreciate just how far you've traveled. You wandered through a time when Christmas wasn't just discouraged, it was illegal. A time when joy had to be whispered, carols were smuggled, and mince pies were treated like black market diamonds. A time when